All right, so today we're diving deep, and you folks really wanted us to take a look at lynching in America
Yeah.
at the turn of the 20th century.
Right around the turn of the century.
To do that, we are going straight to the source,
Mm-hmm.
and that is Ida B. Wells-Barnett's The Red Record.
That's right.
Before we get into it,
Yeah.
it's important to understand that
Yeah.
this wasn't just some, dry historical account. This was groundbreaking investigative journalism.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Red Record served as a really powerful, indictment of the system of racial terror
Yeah.
that gripped America at that time.
Right.
And Wells Barnett, a black journalist, an
Yeah.
activist, and a researcher, risked her life to expose this truth.
Yeah, she wasn't just some detached observer, right?
Yeah.
She was deeply embedded in the communities.
Absolutely.
Affected by this violence.
Mm-hmm.
And her work was driven by a fierce commitment to justice. And one of the things that she does so brilliantly in The Red Record is dismantle these myths, these justifications that are often used to excuse lynching.
Exactly. And these were carefully constructed narratives to make lynching, palatable
Right.
to a wider audience,
Yeah.
right? To paint it as something other than what it truly was. Recall terrorism.
Okay, so let's break down
Yeah.
some of those myths. One of the most prevalent ones, and I have to admit, I had even heard this before digging into Wells Barnett's work, was this idea of the race riot, right? This idea that lynchings were just a spontaneous response to Black uprisings,
Right.
a necessary evil to restore order.
Yeah, that was incredibly effective, I think, in shifting blame,
Yeah.
and framing Black communities as the instigators of the violence, when in reality, Wells Barnett shows us that these supposed riots
Right.
were almost always just one-sided attacks against Black people with no evidence of any actual riot
Right.
taking place.
It's a classic example of how language can be used to distort reality, to dehumanize victims, and to justify violence.
Absolutely, yeah. And another common one was the myth of Black domination, right? This fear that Black political power, especially in the post-Reconstruction era,
Right.
was somehow a threat to white supremacy.
So lynching was a way to kind of reassert control,
Precisely.
to push back against any of the gains made by Black communities during Reconstruction.
And Wells Barnett directly connects the rise in lynchings to the suppression of Black voting rights.
Right.
It was a strategy to maintain white political and economic dominance.
It's chilling to see how those historical patterns connect to, the contemporary struggles for voting rights and social justice.
Yeah, the parallels are undeniable.
Yeah.
And perhaps the most insidious myth.
Right.
And sadly, this is one that we still see surfacing today, is that lynching was about protecting white women.
Ah, yes. This trope, right?
Right.
Of the Black man as a threat to
Right.
the purity and safety of white womanhood.
Precisely. And Wells Barnett meticulously takes apart this argument.
Right.
Right. Pointing out that it wasn't about protecting women at all. It was about controlling them
Yeah.
and using these rape accusations as a weapon to terrorize Black communities.
And she doesn't shy away from
No, she doesn't.
pointing out how those accusations were often used to cover up
Absolutely.
consensual interracial relationships.
Right.
Or to justify violence that had nothing to do with
That's right.
sexual assault.
She gives numerous examples where flimsy accusations, often based on hearsay or just outright fabrication,
Yeah.
were enough to seal a Black man's fate.
Right.
The mere suspicion
Right.
of a Black man being involved with a white woman was enough to ignite a mob's fury.
It's just horrifying.
It is.
To think about the power of these racist stereotypes and how they could literally be a matter of life and death.
And Wells Barnett doesn't stop there.
Right.
Right. She backs up her arguments with data, with hard-hitting data.
Yeah.
The scale of lynching that she documents in the Red Record is just staggering.
Yeah.
She estimates over 10,000 Black people
Wow.
were lynched between 1865 and 1895.
And during that same period, only 3 white men were ever convicted and executed for their involvement in these murders.
That's right.
3 out of thousands.
Yes.
That level of impunity
It's mind-boggling.
it's mind-boggling.
It highlights the fact that lynching wasn't about justice.
Right.
This was about racial control and terror. the disparity in punishment speaks volumes.
It also raises the question of how many more lynchings went unrecorded, right? How many stories were never told? How many families were torn apart without any accountability or recognition of their loss?
It is a sobering thought. It is really important to remember that behind these numbers, each one represents a life lost.
Yeah.
A family shattered, a community traumatized.
Absolutely. And as I was reading the Red Record, what really struck me was just the sheer range of offenses that could lead to a lynching. It wasn't just this mythologized rape accusation, but it was a whole litany of reasons, many of them just incredibly trivial.
It's unbelievable, right? I mean, Wells-Barnett, she lists offenses like stealing hogs, quarreling with a white woman, being considered saucy or disrespectful, suspicion of arson, even simply being related to an accused person.
It's like simply being black was enough to make you a target.
That's the chilling implication, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, the threat of lynching hung over these black communities like a sword.
Yeah.
A constant reminder of their vulnerability in this system designed to dehumanize and control them.
And it's important for us to just pause here.
Yes.
And really let that sink in, right? And consider the psychological and social impact of living under such a threat, right?
Yeah.
Imagine the fear, the distrust, the constant awareness that your life could be taken away at any moment.
For any reason.
For any reason or for no reason at all.
Exactly.
We need to we need to shift from these larger statistics to the individual stories.
I agree.
To truly grasp the human cost of this violence.
You're absolutely right. And to bring that trauma into sharper focus, I think we should really delve into some specific cases.
I agree.
That Wells-Barnett documents. And while these accounts, they can be graphic and disturbing, they're essential to understanding the true nature of lynching in America.
I agree. And while we won't overwhelm you with too many details, I think it's crucial to hear about the brutality of these acts to really get a sense of the terror that black communities faced.
Let's start with the cremation of Henry Smith.
Okay.
So this case took place in Paris, Texas in 1893. And it stands out not only for its cruelty, but for what it reveals about the mindset of the mob.
Right.
So Henry Smith, a black man, was accused of murdering a young white girl. Now, while the crime itself was horrific, what followed was just a spectacle of unimaginable cruelty.
Yeah, and it was a public lynching, right?
Yes. It wasn't some hidden act of violence. This was something that was deliberately orchestrated for maximum impact.
Yeah.
Wells-Barnett describes how thousands of people gathered to watch as Smith was tortured for almost an hour.
And they burned him with hot irons, right?
Yes.
Starting at his feet and working their way up his body.
That's right.
And if that wasn't enough, then they doused him with kerosene and set him on fire.
They burned him alive.
She even quotes
she does.
Eyewitness accounts, and the descriptions are
it's hard to even comprehend that level of barbarity.
It's beyond and what's even more disturbing is how this event was presented in the media. Like some newspapers,
even in the North.
Yeah, even in the North, attempted to justify the lynching.
They did.
Claiming that the young girl had been sexually assaulted and that the mob's rage was understandable.
Right.
But Wells-Barnett, as always, challenges that narrative.
She does.
She points out that while the murder was undeniable, the allegations of sexual assault were at best exaggerated and likely fabricated to just inflame public opinion and justify the horrific violence inflicted upon Henry Smith.
It's a prime example.
It is.
Of how racial prejudice and
sensationalism were weaponized to justify the most horrific acts of violence.
Another case that I found particularly disturbing
was the lynching of the Julian brothers in Louisiana.
Right.
And this one really highlights how mob violence could target entire families.
It could.
How guilt by association could literally be a death sentence.
Absolutely. So one of the brothers, Roselius Julian, was accused of killing a white judge.
Okay.
And he fled. Despite a massive manhunt, he was never captured.
Right.
But the mob, unable to get their hands on him, decided to take their revenge on his family.
They went after his mother, his brothers and sisters.
Yes. They were arrested and held on suspicion of aiding the fugitive, even though there was no evidence to support that claim.
Right.
But that didn't matter to the mob. They stormed the jail, they selected 2 of the brothers, and they hanged them right there on the property.
And Wells-Barnett's...
It's heartbreaking.
The account is just...
She describes how one brother prayed
Yeah.
while the other one stood defiant, both knowing that their deaths were imminent.
It's a truly powerful image of courage in the face of just unimaginable terror.
It is. And tragically, it didn't end there. I mean, the mob then went after the 3rd brother.
Wow.
They tracked him down, and they lynched him as well.
All of this because they couldn't find the actual suspect.
It really underscores the indiscriminate nature of mob violence.
Right.
How it could consume anyone in its path.
Yeah.
Regardless of their guilt or innocence.
And then there's the case of Charles Miller.
Right.
Which stands out because it demonstrates how easily
the lynch mob could get it wrong.
The lynch mob could get it wrong.
Yes.
And how deeply ingrained racial prejudice could lead to the death of an innocent man.
That's right.
Can you tell us more about his story?
So Charles Miller was a black man accused of murdering 2 young white girls in Kentucky.
Okay.
And despite maintaining his innocence, offering evidence to support his alibi, he was quickly condemned by the mob.
And Wells-Barnett notes that there were inconsistencies in the
eyewitness accounts.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that the evidence against Miller was flimsy at best.
But none of that mattered to the mob, who were already convinced of his guilt. They even built a bonfire intending to burn him alive.
It was only through the intervention of a few individuals who insisted on a
more thorough investigation that his life was spared, at least temporarily.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that reprieve was short-lived. I mean, despite growing doubts about his guilt, the mob eventually stormed the jail and they hanged Miller, ignoring all the evidence that pointed to his innocence.
It's a chilling example of how swiftly justice could be perverted and how quickly reason could be overcome by
racial hysteria and mob mentality.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember that these are just a few examples. Among thousands, right? I mean, Wells-Barnett's The Red Record is filled with countless other stories, each more horrific than the last.
And these stories force us to confront the brutal reality of lynching in America.
Yes.
To see it not as a series of isolated incidents, but as a systemic...
As a systemic campaign of terror designed to maintain white supremacy.
And they also underscore the importance of Ida B. Wells-Barnett's work.
They do.
Her courage in speaking out against these injustices and her determination to expose the truth to a wider audience.
And her work didn't just document these atrocities. It had a profound impact on how lynching was perceived both in America and abroad. And Wells-Barnett was just incredibly strategic in her approach.
Yeah.
You know, she understood that to really affect change, she needed to reach beyond, you know, those already sympathetic to the cause.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. She was a master at using her platform to amplify the voices of the victims.
That's right.
And to challenge those prevailing narratives about lynching.
Yeah.
So the Red Record played a pivotal role.
It did.
In galvanizing international attention and condemnation of American lynching practices.
And she understood that.
Right.
You know, by highlighting how the rest of the world viewed these atrocities, it would shame America on a global stage.
Right.
And pressure the U.S. government.
To take action.
To take action.
It's fascinating how she uses the international community as a kind of like a mirror, right?
Totally.
Reflecting back the barbarity of what was happening in America and exposing this hypocrisy, right? Of a nation that claimed to be this beacon of freedom and justice while tolerating this reign of terror against its black citizens.
It was a brilliant strategy.
It was.
So she even traveled to Inglis in Scotland, speaking to packed audiences about the horrors of lynching.
Right.
And newspapers like the London Times picked up on her work.
Right.
And began reporting on these atrocities, putting pressure on the U.S. government
to address this issue.
Address the issue.
So she's not just reporting on events.
Right.
She's actively...
she's actively shaping the narrative.
Yes.
Mobilizing public opinion.
Yes.
And pushing for concrete action.
She was a force to be reckoned with.
It's amazing how she seamlessly blends investigative journalism with activism.
Yeah, and it's important to note that her work wasn't met with universal acclaim.
Right.
Right? I mean, even in the North.
Right.
There were many who were willing to accept those justifications for lynching.
And justifications, yeah.
Who saw Black people as somehow deserving of this violence.
It's a reminder that even in societies that claim to uphold, equality and justice, there are often these deep-seated prejudices and biases that can, make it so difficult to see the humanity of those who are different from us. You're absolutely right. And Wells-Barnett, she faced intense criticism, even death threats, for speaking out against these injustices. But she refused to be silenced.
She was a trailblazer, a fearless
advocate for justice at a time.
Yeah.
When speaking truth to power could cost you your life.
Absolutely. And she didn't just stop at exposing the problem. She also offered solutions.
Right. She wasn't content with just documenting the horrors of lynching. She wanted to stop them.
Stop them, yeah.
And she did so with remarkable clarity and pragmatism.
Yeah.
Right. So she laid out this three-pronged approach for combating lynching. Each point addressing a different aspect of the problem. First, she called for fair trials for all, regardless of race. She understood that the legal system was often rigged
against Black people.
That they were denied basic due process rights, and faced a presumption of guilt based solely on the color of their skin.
It's tragic how relevant that point remains even today, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, we're still grappling with issues of racial bias.
Absolutely.
In our legal system, disparities in sentencing, and the overrepresentation of people of color in our prisons.
The parallels are undeniable. And Wells-Barnett was acutely aware of how deeply embedded these biases were. And how they manifested in the denial of justice for Black people.
Yeah, her second point focused on challenging the dominant narratives. And particularly this myth of Black men as inherent threats to white women.
That's right. She recognized how this deeply ingrained prejudice was used to justify violence against Black men. And she called for a counter-narrative, one based on truth and evidence.
So it wasn't just about changing hearts and minds. It was about, exposing the lies.
That's right.
The distortions.
The fabrications.
That were used to just prop up these racist beliefs.
Exactly.
It was about investigative journalism as a tool for social change.
Precisely. So she advocated for real investigations. For highlighting cases where accusations were false or exaggerated. And for presenting the facts in a way that could dismantle these harmful stereotypes.
Yeah, and her third point, which I find particularly insightful, focuses on leveraging economic pressure to combat lynching. And she argues that it wasn't just a moral issue. It was an economic one.
It was both.
Right.
She recognized that appealing to people's, self-interest could be a powerful motivator.
Yeah, you have to hit people where it hurts.
Exactly.
In their wallet.
To
get them to pay attention.
Right. And she pointed out how lynching deterred investment. It scared off skilled labor. It created an environment of instability, all of which harmed the South's economic prospects.
And this wasn't just rhetoric.
No, it wasn't.
She presented data and analysis.
She did.
To back up her claims.
Effectively making the case that ending lynching was not only the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do.
And it's a strategy that we see that still resonates.
Oh, absolutely.
With activists today.
Yeah.
We see this approach being used in movements for environmental justice, economic equality, LGBTQ plus rights.
Totally.
So Wells-Barnett understood that to achieve lasting change, you need to build a broad coalition of support.
Yes, you do. And she was brilliant at connecting the dots between different issues. Showing how racial injustice was intertwined with economic inequality, political disenfranchisement, and the erosion of basic human rights.
And it's remarkable how much of what she fought for, what she wrote about over a century ago, it still resonates with us today.
I know.
These issues of racial prejudice, the manipulation of narratives for political gain, and the fight for a just and equitable society. It feels as relevant now.
Doesn't it?
As it was then.
It's both a testament to her enduring legacy, And a stark reminder
Yeah.
of how deeply entrenched these problems are in our society.
It can be disheartening.
It can.
To see how slowly progress is made.
It can be.
But Wells-Barnett's work offers like a glimmer of hope, you know? She shows us that one voice can make a difference, that speaking truth to power can
spark a movement.
Yeah. And that even in the face of
overwhelming odds.
Yeah, overwhelming odds, we have a responsibility to stand up.
We do.
For what's right.
And with that in mind, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Red Record, I want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Knowing what we know now about the horrors of lynching and its underlying causes, and this courageous fight against it, how does this knowledge change our understanding of the world today?
That's a powerful question, and one that I think each of us really needs to grapple with, individually.
Yeah.
As we've discussed, the fight for justice is far from over.
Yeah.
And while the forms of racial terror may have evolved, the underlying systems of oppression, they persist.
Right.
And Wells-Barnett's meticulous documentation of these lynchings, her fearless challenge of these prevailing narratives, and her unwavering advocacy for justice, serve as a beacon, guiding us towards a path of dismantling
these systems. It's interesting how, while the Red Record focuses on a very specific period in American history, its message transcends that particular moment. Her work has this kind of timeless quality to it, speaking to these broader themes of human rights, dignity, and the fundamental value of every
human
life, regardless of race, gender, social standing.
Absolutely. And Wells-Barnett's insights into the mechanics of power. The construction and the manipulation of narratives. And these insidious ways in which systems of oppression are maintained remain strikingly relevant. Her work helps us connect the dots between seemingly disparate events, revealing these underlying patterns of injustice that continue to shape our world.
It's almost like she's providing us with a
blueprint,
a blueprint for resistance, for challenging the status quo, for holding those in power accountable, and for demanding a more just and equitable society.
She does.
And she reminds us that this pursuit of justice requires constant vigilance.
It does.
Courage, and a willingness to speak truth to power, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's dangerous.
One of the things that makes the Red Record so compelling, I think, is how Wells-Barnett seamlessly blends this meticulous research and data analysis with just powerful storytelling. So she doesn't just present the facts, she brings them to life through these vivid descriptions, these personal testimonies, and these heartbreaking accounts of individual lives lost to racial terror.
And she does so in a way that avoids sensationalism while still conveying the raw brutality of these acts.
She does.
She forces the reader
to confront the horrific reality.
Of lynching.
Yes.
To see it not as these series of isolated incidents, but as this
deliberate and systemic campaign of terror
designed to maintain white supremacy. It's a difficult read.
It is.
No doubt.
But an essential one.
And it's important to remember that Wells-Barnett wasn't content with simply documenting these atrocities.
She wanted to stop them.
Right?
Yes.
Her three-pronged approach, demanding fair trials, challenging the racist narratives, leveraging economic pressure.
Yes.
Offered a concrete roadmap for action.
It did.
One that continues to inspire
activists and reformers today.
Absolutely. And what's so striking about her approach is its practicality.
She understood that to achieve real change, you need to work on multiple fronts. To engage in both systemic and cultural transformation. She was a master strategist, recognizing that the fight for justice requires a multifaceted approach.
Absolutely, and her legacy extends far beyond the specific issue of lynching. She laid the groundwork For future generations.
For future generations of activists and organizers.
Activists and organizers.
Demonstrating the power of investigative journalism, the importance of challenging dominant narratives, and the need for a multi-pronged approach to dismantling systems of oppression.
So as we conclude this deep dive into Ida B. Wells-Barnett's The Red Record, we're left with this profound sense of her
enduring legacy.
And a renewed understanding of this ongoing struggle for racial justice.
Absolutely.
Her work serves as both a stark reminder of the horrors of the past and a source of inspiration for those working towards
a more just
and equitable future.
And it challenges each of us to reflect on our own roles in perpetuating or dismantling systems of oppression. What will we do with this knowledge? How will we ensure that the fight for justice continues? These are questions that deserve our careful consideration.
Absolutely.
Wells-Barnett showed us that one voice can make a difference, that speaking truth to power can spark a movement, and that even in the face of overwhelming odds, we have a responsibility to stand up for what's right. Let her legacy be a guiding light as we navigate the complexities of our own time.